Have you ever felt invisible, like the person people see is just a faded photograph of who you really are? It's a strange feeling to have lived a life so full of color and passion, only to be looked at in shades of gray. They see the wrinkles, the slight tremble in your hand as you reach for a cup of tea, and they make up their minds. They decide you're finished. They decide your story is over. Well, let me tell you something. Sometimes the most explosive, most vibrant, most world-changing chapter doesn't even begin until they've already closed the book. My children closed the book on me. They just never thought to ask what I'd spent my whole life writing inside it. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been dismissed, then you're going to want to hear this. Stick around, and I'll tell you how my children's greatest act of pity turned into my greatest moment of power. My name is Virginia. I am 80 years old, and according to my children, Grayson and Brooke, I am frail. That was the word they used, over and over, like a mantra to convince themselves of its truth. Frail. It's a word that smells of mothballs and weak tea. It sounds like the shuffling of slippers on linoleum. It's a dismissive word, a word that erases everything you were to focus on, the shell you've become. And they had decided, with the brisk, unassailable confidence that only the middle-aged can muster when dealing with their elders, that my frailty meant I was no longer capable of living in my own home, my home of 50 years. The home where I had raised them, the home where I had loved their father, Robert, and the home where I had grieved him. The home that held every secret, every triumph, every brushstroke of my entire life. They moved me here, to sunny Meadows assisted living. The name is a cruel joke, of course. The Meadows are a manicured patch of unnaturally green lawn, and the sun is filtered through triple-paned windows that don't open, casting a sterile, lukewarm light on the beige walls. My room is a perfect little box, a bed, a chair, a small table, a television bolted to the wall. It's clean, it's safe, and it is utterly, completely devoid of me. It is a waiting room for the end of a life. The day they moved me, the betrayal was a physical thing, a cold, heavy stone in my stomach. Grayson, my son, ever the practical one, with his spreadsheets and his sensible shoes, had his hand on the small of my back, guiding me through the automatic doors as if I were a fragile piece of glass. "It's for the best, Mom," he said, his voice laced with that infuriating, gentle condescension he'd adopted ever since his father passed. "You'll be safe here. No more stairs to worry about. 3 square meals a day." Brooke, my daughter, was worse. She flitted around the small room, her voice a high, bright performance of cheerfulness. "Look, Mother, a view of the garden, and we'll bring your favorite photos, of course. We'll make it cozy." She patted my hand, her rings cold against my skin. "We just couldn't bear the thought of you rattling around in that big old house all by yourself. It's too much." It wasn't too much. It was my life. The rattling they heard was the sound of my existence. The true gut punch, the moment that stole the air from my lungs, came later that afternoon. I was sitting in the beige chair, watching a dust mote dance in a sunbeam, when my phone rang. It was Brooke. Her voice was even more chipper than before, the sound of someone who has just accomplished a difficult but necessary task. "Hi, Mom. Just wanted to let you know the estate sale company is there now. A Mr. Davies. He said it's a lot of stuff, but he thinks he can have it all cleared out by the end of the week." I gripped the phone. "The estate company? Brooke, what are you talking about?" "Oh, you know, Mom, to sell off all that, well, all that eccentric clutter you've collected over the years. It's a fire hazard, honestly, and we need to sell the house. This place isn't cheap, you know. Eccentric clutter, my canvases, stacked 10 deep in the attic, chronicles of my soul, my paint-splattered furniture, each drop a memory, my collection of odd sculptures, welded and carved from scrap metal and driftwood, each one a conversation with the universe. My life's work, the physical manifestation of a secret I had guarded fiercely for more than 4 decades. You can't, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. Brooke, you can't sell those things. Not the paintings. There was a sigh on the other end of the line, the weary sound of a daughter dealing with a difficult parent. Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. They're just your old hobby things. Mr. Davies said we'd be lucky to get a few hundred for the lot, but it's more about clearing the space. It's for the best. Really, Grayson and I have the power of attorney. It's all taken care of. Power of attorney. A weapon they had convinced me to give them for medical emergencies, now repurposed to dismantle my entire identity. They thought they were selling junk. They thought they were liquidating the harmless, messy hobby of a lonely old woman to pay for her upkeep. They called it clutter. What they never knew, what I had never told a soul, besides my Robert, was that for the past 40 years, I have been Cora. Cora is not frail. Cora is not a hobbyist. Cora is a celebrated, highly secretive, and deeply respected abstract artist. Cora's work hangs in the most exclusive galleries in New York, London, and Tokyo. Critics write theses on Cora's use of color and texture. Collectors wait for years to acquire one of her pieces, often paying 6, sometimes even 7, figures for the privilege. Cora's anonymity is legendary in the art world, a deliberate choice to let the work speak for itself, free from the personality cult that so often surrounds artists. And my children, in their infinite, loving, dismissive wisdom, had just hired a cut-rate estate liquidator to sell a lifetime's worth of priceless, authenticated Cora originals for pennies on the dollar. They had just flooded the market with my soul. Brooke was still talking. Something about visiting on Sunday and bringing me a new cardigan. I don't remember what I said. I think I just hung up. I sat there in the beige room, in the sterile, silent air of sunny Meadows, and I looked at my hands. These old, wrinkled hands with their swollen knuckles and paper-thin skin. They didn't look like much. But these hands had built a world. These hands had wrestled with color and light and shadow. These hands had created Cora. And as the full weight of what my children had done settled over me, a strange calm washed through the despair. It wasn't a feeling of defeat. It was the quiet, cold hum of a machine powering on. They thought they were putting a frail old woman out to pasture. They had no idea they were about to unleash Cora on the world. The art world was about to be in an uproar, and my children, my dear concerned children, were about to learn the true, staggering value of the junk they so carelessly discarded. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. At that moment, it was about survival. It was about reclaiming the name they had tried so hard to erase. The first few days at Sunny Meadows were a study in erasure. I was no longer Virginia Miller, who loved the smell of turpentine and the feel of rough canvas under her fingers. I was resident 3B. My days were measured not by inspiration or creation, but by medication schedules and meal times. Breakfast at 7:30, lunch at noon, dinner at 5. The food was soft and bland, designed for palates that had forgotten the joy of spice, of texture. The conversations in the communal dining hall were a loop of ailments, grandchildren, and the weather. I felt my edges blurring, my colors fading to the same beige as the walls. The grief was a physical presence. It was the hollowness in my chest when I woke up in a strange bed, the morning light all wrong. It was the phantom smell of oil paint that I'd catch for a fleeting second, only to realize it was just the industrial floor cleaner they used in the hallways. My children had not just taken my home, they had taken my context. An artist without her studio, without her tools, is a ghost. I was haunting myself. During those first weeks, I would lie awake at night, and the flashbacks would come, unbidden and sharp as glass. I saw Robert, his face alight with pride, the first time I sold a piece as Cora. It was a small gallery in Soho, a place that no longer exists. The painting was called January Thaw, a swirl of icy blues and grays with a defiant slash of yellow. We'd used the money, a staggering $5,000 at the time, to fix the leaky roof. Robert had grabbed me, dancing me around the kitchen, his laughter echoing off the pots and pans. He said, "You've got a secret, Ginny, a big, beautiful secret, and I'll be your best secret keeper." He was. He built me shelves. He gessoed my canvases. He made me tea at 3 in the morning when an idea wouldn't let me sleep. He was the silent, sturdy frame that held my art. When he died 2 years ago, the frame broke. The house fell silent. The colors seemed duller. It was then that Grayson and Brooke's concern began in earnest. They saw my grief, my quietness, and they labeled it incompetence. They mistook sorrow for senility. They never once asked about the paintings, about the work that had sustained me through it all. To them, it was just part of the house, like the floral wallpaper or the squeaky back door. Then another memory would surface, this one from much earlier. Grayson, maybe 10 years old, and Brooke, 7. I was working on a huge canvas, a riot of deep crimsons and fiery oranges. They came running in from the garden, muddy and loud, and built a fort behind the easel, using one of my smaller, finished canvases as a wall. I heard Brooke say, "Let's use one of Mom's messy pictures." Messy pictures, that's all they had ever been to them. My passion, my profession, my secret life was just part of the background noise of their childhood. I had never corrected them. How could I? Explaining Cora would have meant explaining a part of myself I kept separate for a reason. I wanted them to have a normal mother, not a myth. I wanted the art to be its own entity, pure and unattached to bake sales and parent-teacher conferences. I see now that in protecting my art, I had made it invisible to them. And people tend to discard what they cannot see. One afternoon, during what the staff cheerfully called activity hour, I was sitting in the common room, pointedly ignoring a game of bingo. I had managed to smuggle in a small charcoal pencil and a little notepad from the welcome basket. I was sketching the gnarled hands of the woman sitting across from me, a lady named Edith, who perpetually stared out the window. The lines, the shadows, the story told in the wrinkled skin. It was a comfort, a tiny act of creation in a sea of managed decline. "That's really good." The voice was young, quiet. I looked up. It was one of the nurses, or rather, a certified nursing assistant. Her name tag read Anya. She was maybe 22, with kind dark eyes and hair pulled back in a severe ponytail that couldn't quite contain a few rebellious curls. She wasn't looking at me with the polite, placating smile of the other staff members. She was looking at the sketch, really looking. "You've captured the weight in her hands," Anya said softly, nodding toward Edith. "Most people just see old hands. You see the story." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something other than loss, a spark of connection. I am an old woman. I know. I've learned to read people. In her eyes, I saw not a healthcare worker doing her job, but the unmistakable hunger of a fellow artist. "You draw?" I asked. She blushed. "I'm trying. I'm at the community college, taking art classes at night. It's expensive." She gestured vaguely around the room. "This pays the bills." We talked for a few more minutes. She told me about her struggle to master perspective, about her love for the works of Ketha Kollwitz. It was the first real conversation I'd had since arriving. Before she left to check on another resident, she looked at my sketch again. "You're a real artist," she said. "A statement of fact, not a compliment. You're not just doodling." That night the catalyst came. I couldn't sleep, my mind a racetrack of old memories and new anxieties. I padded out of my room to the small, empty sitting area at the end of the hall, just needing a change of scenery. The night shift nurse was at the main desk, absorbed in a novel. I sat in a chair near the empty reception counter, hidden in the shadows, and then I heard it, the faint, tinny sound of a phone conversation. It was the night nurse, her voice low. I realized she was talking to my son. Grayson's voice was audible, a faint metallic buzz from the phone's earpiece. I couldn't make out the words, but the nurse's replies painted the whole ugly picture. "Yes, Mr. Miller. She's settling in fine. No trouble at all. Very quiet. Yes, the sale was last weekend." "Oh, that's wonderful. It must be such a relief for you." There was a pause. "Oh, I can only imagine. A whole house full of yes. Well, I'm glad you were able to finally deal with that hoarding problem. It must be a weight off your shoulders." A hoarding problem. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Hoarding, that's what he called it. That's the story they told the world, told themselves. My life, my art, my legacy, reduced to a psychological disorder. A problem to be dealt with, a weight to be lifted from their shoulders. I shrank back into the shadows, my blood running cold. The casual cruelty of it, the complete and utter lack of understanding, it was breathtaking. They weren't just mistaken, they were smug. They felt relief. They felt they had done a good, noble thing by imprisoning their mother and trashing her life's work. I stood up, my body trembling not with frailty, but with a rage so pure and cold, it felt like ice water flooding my veins. I walked back to my room, the beige walls seeming to close in on me. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, and the despair I'd been fighting finally washed over me completely. This was my low point. I was utterly alone, stripped of my past, my tools, my voice. I was resident 3B, a hoarder who had been tidied away. And then, through the despair, a new feeling began to rise. It was the same defiant slash of yellow I had painted in January thaw, all those years ago. It was resolve. It was Cora. They thought they had buried Virginia Miller. They had no idea that Cora was about to dig her way out. The quiet sadness I had felt curdled into something hard and sharp. The game had changed. They had made it about tidiness, about management, about their own convenience. Fine. I would make it about value. I would make it about truth. I would make it about a full and final accounting. Right then, sitting in that sterile room, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be a victim in the final chapter of my own story. I was going to be the author, and the ending was going to be a masterpiece. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. The next morning, I was a woman with a mission. The fog of grief and disorientation had burned away, leaving behind a crystalline clarity. My first move was to find Anya. I caught her as she was doing her rounds, handing out morning medications from a little plastic cart. "Anya," I said, my voice low and steady, "I need your help. It's important." She looked at me, her young face full of concern. She probably thought I was having a medical issue. "Of course, Virginia. What's wrong? Are you feeling all right?" "I'm feeling better than I have in weeks," I said, and it was the truth. "But I need to make a phone call, a private phone call, and I need a phone that my children don't know about." Her eyebrows shot up in surprise. She glanced down the hall, then wheeled her cart into my room, closing the door most of the way. "A burner phone," she whispered, a hint of awe in her voice. Is that what they're called? I asked. Then yes, I need a burner phone. I will pay you for it, and for your time, and for your discretion. I reached into the small drawer of my nightstand, where I kept my wallet. I still had a few $100s in cash that they hadn't thought to confiscate. I pulled out $300 bills. Will this be enough? Anya stared at the money, then back at my face. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the professional duty warring with her human curiosity, and I hoped her sense of justice. She saw the desperation and determination in my expression. You don't have to pay me, Virginia, she said, pushing the money gently back toward me. Keep it. You might need it, but you have to tell me what's going on. Are you in some kind of trouble? And so I told her. I didn't tell her everything. Not about Cora. Not yet. I kept it simple. I told her my children had sold my belongings without my full consent, including items that were deeply personal and sentimentally valuable. I told her I needed to contact an old friend in New York, a business associate, to help me sort things out, and I couldn't risk my children listening in or seeing the call on a phone bill. Her expression shifted from concern to indignation. They sold your things. From your house. She was a good kid, with a strong moral compass. That's horrible. Of course I'll help you. She got me the phone that evening, a simple, anonymous prepaid device. She showed me how to use it, her brow furrowed in concentration. As I held the small plastic rectangle in my hand, it felt heavier than a brick. It felt like a weapon. That night, after the last of the evening checks, I locked my door and sat on my bed, the little phone glowing in my hand. My heart was pounding. This was the point of no return. I had one number memorized, a number I hadn't called in over a year, but one I could never forget. It was the private line to Julian Croft's office. Julian has been my gallerist, my dealer, for 38 years. He was a brash young upstart with an eye for talent when he first saw my work. Now he was a titan of the New York art scene, a kingmaker. Our entire relationship had been built on a handshake and a shared belief in the sanctity of the art. He was the only other person on earth, besides my late Robert, who knew that the reclusive, mysterious Cora was an 80-year-old woman named Virginia Miller living in a quiet suburban house. He had guarded my secret as fiercely as I had. I dialed the number. It rang 3 times, and then a familiar voice, gravelly and impatient, answered. Croft. Julian, I said. My voice was raspy. There was a long silence on the other end. I could picture him in his office, high above Madison Avenue, surrounded by sculptures and canvases worth more than the entire Sunny Meadows facility. Cora, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Is that you? My God. Where are you? I've been trying your home line for weeks. I thought, well, I didn't know what to think. I'm not at home, Julian. My children, they've put me in a home. The words sounded so bald, so ugly, when I said them out loud. They what? The shock in his voice was validating. Good heavens, are you all right? I'm fine, I said, my voice gaining strength. But Julian, they've done something else. They had an estate sale. They sold everything. The contents of the house, the studio, the attic. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It stretched for a full 10 seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight with a controlled fury I knew well. Virginia, tell me exactly what you mean by everything. I mean every canvas, every sketch, the signed pieces, the unsigned studies, the sculptures, all of it. They hired a local liquidator. They told me they'd be lucky to get a few $100s. I heard a sharp intake of breath, then a string of curses that would have made a sailor blush. Virginia, he said, his voice strained, are you aware of what is happening in the art market right now? I have no access to news of that world anymore, Julian. It's chaos, he said, his voice rising with a frantic energy. Absolute pandemonium. For the last week, the market has been flooded. Small auction houses, online marketplaces, even flea market pickers, they're all turning up with what look like authentic, early to mid-period, chorus, pieces no one has ever seen before. The provenance is a mess. It all traces back to some suburban estate sale in your town. We thought it was a brilliant forger at first, but the authentication reports started coming in. They're real. The signatures are perfect. The paint composition, the hidden fibers, they're all yours. I've had collectors calling me from Dubai, from Hong Kong, screaming at me, asking me how this happened. How did 100 authenticated Cora originals just appear out of nowhere and sell for chump change? I closed my eyes, so it had already started. The ripples were spreading. They didn't know what they were, Julian. They called them my eccentric clutter. Clutter, he choked on the word. Virginia, the piece you called Scrap Heap, Serenade #3, the little welded bird sculpture. I saw a photo of it online. Someone bought it for $75. I sold its sister piece last year for $400,000. Your children haven't just cleaned out your house. They've detonated a bomb in the middle of your legacy. We talked for an hour. It was a whirlwind of logistics, of strategy. My mind, which had felt so sluggish and fuzzy, was now sharp and clear. This was my element. Not the bingo hall, but the world of strategy, value, and consequence. Julian was already 3 steps ahead. Okay, he said, his voice now crisp and businesslike. Here's what we do. First, we need to establish your legal standing. Your children mentioned a power of attorney. For medical decisions, I clarified. I signed it after Robert died. I never gave them a general or financial power of attorney to liquidate my assets. I'm sure of it. Robert was a lawyer. He taught me to read the fine print. This was the key, the small but crucial detail that my loving children had overlooked in their haste to tidy me away. Excellent, Julian breathed. That's our weapon. They've acted illegally. They've disposed of assets that were not theirs to dispose of. Virginia, this is theft, grand larceny, on a scale that is almost comical. He told me he was hiring a lawyer for me, not just any lawyer, but the best elder law attorney in my state, a shark named Helena Albright. He would pay for it, an advance against the future sales he was now determined to orchestrate. Second, he continued, we need to control the narrative. Right now the art world is confused. They think you might be dead, and this is some long-lost treasure trove. I am going to hold a press conference. I won't reveal your name or location, but I will announce that Cora is alive and well, and that this flood of work comes from an unauthorized, illegal sale. I will state that any work originating from this estate sale has a tainted provenance and is for all intents and purposes stolen property until it is recovered and re-authenticated by my gallery. It was brilliant. He wasn't just fighting back, he was salting the earth. He was turning every bargain into a potential legal liability for the buyer. What do I do? I asked. You, my dear Cora, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice, are going to sit tight. You are going to let Miss Albright handle your children. Do not speak to them. Do not answer their calls. You are now a fortress. Let them bang on the walls. They will find they no longer have the key. Before we hung up, I had to ask him one more thing. Julian, why are you doing all this? His reply was instant. Because for 38 years, we've been partners, and because I have spent my entire career defending the idea that art has value beyond its price tag. Your children have insulted that principle. They have insulted you, and they have insulted me. This isn't just about the money, Virginia. It's about the work. It's about making them understand what they so carelessly threw away. After the call, I felt a profound sense of peace. The plan was in motion. The pieces were moving on the board. I looked around my little beige room. It no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a war room. The next day, I had my first call with Helena Albright. Her voice was exactly as I had imagined, sharp, precise, and completely devoid of sentimentality. She asked pointed questions about the power of attorney, about my assets, about my children's behavior. I answered them all, my memory a perfect record of every condescending conversation, every dismissive comment. Miss Albright was delighted. They've overplayed their hand so badly. It's a thing of beauty, Mrs. Miller, she'd said with what sounded like genuine admiration. They used a limited medical POA as a blank check to liquidate your estate. They didn't even bother to have your assets appraised, which is a gross violation of their fiduciary duty, even if they had the authority, which they do not. They've left a trail of legal breadcrumbs a first-year law student could follow to a conviction. The plan was simple and devastating. Phase 1, cut them off. Miss Albright drew up a document immediately, a formal revocation of power of attorney. She also drafted 2 letters. The first was a cease and desist letter to my children, informing them that all their authority over my affairs was terminated, effective immediately. It demanded a full and complete accounting of the estate sale, every item sold, every price, every buyer's name, within 5 business days. It also informed them that they were under investigation for the illegal disposal of assets. The second letter was for the estate liquidator, Mr. Alistair Davies. Miss Albright's tone, when she described this letter, was almost cheerful. It informed him that he had trafficked in stolen goods of extraordinary value, that he was liable for the full market value of every piece he had sold, and that he could either cooperate fully with our investigation or face a lawsuit that would not only bankrupt him but likely end his career. Anya helped me get the documents signed and sent out by courier. She was my secret agent, my lifeline to the outside world. I had finally told her the whole story of Cora, showing her an old art magazine on a tablet she'd brought me, pointing to an article about my work. Her eyes had grown wide, her jaw slack. She looked from the glossy pages of the magazine to me, the old woman in the beige room, and back again. The awe on her face was a balm to my wounded spirit. She saw me. Finally, someone saw me. 2 days later, Julian held his press conference in New York. Anya and I watched a live stream of it on her tablet, huddled together in my room like 2 schoolgirls sharing a secret. Julian was magnificent. He stood at a podium, the picture of gravitas and authority. He spoke of Cora's legacy, her importance to the abstract expressionist movement. Then he dropped the bomb. Cora is alive, he announced, and the room of assembled journalists erupted. She is well, and she continues to work. However, it has come to our attention that a significant body of her work has been illegally brought to market through an unsanctioned estate sale. These works are to be considered stolen property. We will be working with law enforcement and a team of recovery specialists to reclaim every last piece. Any gallery or collector found to be holding these works will be contacted. We advise you to cooperate. The effect was instantaneous. It was like dropping a boulder into a placid pond. The first call came to the nursing home's main desk less than an hour later. The receptionist, a kindly woman named Doris, buzzed my room. "Virginia, dear, your son Grayson is on the line. He sounds very upset." "I'm not available to take his call, Doris," I said, my voice perfectly calm. "In fact, I won't be taking any calls from my children for the foreseeable future. Please take a message." There was a surprised pause. "Oh, all right, dear." An hour later, another call, this time from Brooke, then another from Grayson. The messages Doris relayed became increasingly frantic. "What is this legal letter? Who is Helena Albright? Mom, you need to call me back right now. What is this nonsense about stolen art in the news? Is this some kind of joke? The panic was a symphony to my ears. They were confused. They were floundering. Their tidy little world, where they were the competent adults managing their frail, hoarding mother, had been turned completely upside down. The next day, they showed up in person. I was in the common room, reading a book, when I saw them through the large front windows. They strode toward the entrance with an air of angry purpose, but when they tried to get past reception, Doris stood her ground. "I'm sorry," I heard her say, her voice polite but firm, "but Mrs. Miller has left specific instructions that she is not accepting any visitors today." "We're not visitors. We're her children," Grayson boomed, his face turning a blotchy red. "We have power of attorney. According to this letter I received from her lawyer this morning," Doris said, holding up a piece of paper Miss Albright had wisely couriered over. "You do not." Their shock was palpable, even from across the room. They had been locked out. The keys to my life, which they had held so carelessly, no longer fit the locks. They stood there in the lobby, impotent and furious, two adults being told no for the first time in a very long time. They eventually left, after leaving a string of furious, sputtering messages with Doris. That evening, I received a call on my new secret phone. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Mrs. Miller." The voice was reedy, panicked. "My name is Alistair Davies. I was the liquidator for your house. I received a letter from your attorney." "I know who you are, Mr. Davies," I said coldly. "Please," he begged, his voice cracking. "I had no idea. They told me it was just junk, old paintings. They said you were unwell. I swear to you I didn't know. I've been getting calls all day from people who bought things. The news is everywhere. A man who bought a canvas for $50 just had it insured for $500,000. What have I done?" "You have done exactly what my children paid you to do, Mr. Davies," I said. "You failed to perform due diligence. You failed to recognize the profound value of what you were handling. You were lazy, and now you are liable." "I'll do anything," he pleaded. "I have all the records, the names, the phone numbers of every buyer, credit card receipts, everything. I'll give it all to you. Please, just don't ruin me." I smiled, a slow, quiet smile. "You will package every single document you have, Mr. Davies. You will send it by courier to the offices of Helena Albright. If you are fully cooperative, she may take that into consideration. That is all." I hung up the phone. The silent takeover was complete. I had the law on my side. I had the art world in an uproar. And now, thanks to the terrified Mr. Davies, I had a map to every single piece of my stolen life. My children had lost control of the narrative. They had lost their legal authority, and they were about to lose their last shred of dignity. The fortress walls were holding strong, and I was safe inside, watching the storm rage. The collapse of my children's united front was faster and more spectacular than I could have ever imagined. Deprived of their common enemy, in my supposed state of frailty, they immediately turned their fear and fury on each other. The first sign came via a voicemail. Brooke left on the main nursing home line, which Doris dutifully transcribed for me with a certain grim satisfaction. "Mother, you need to call me. This is insane. This is all Grayson's fault. He was the one who found that dreadful little man Davies. I wanted to use a proper auction house, but he said it would be too expensive. He's always been so cheap. Now look at the mess he's made. You need to tell your lawyer to talk to me, not him. This is his mess." An hour later, a message from Grayson. "Mom, I'm sure Brooke is trying to blame this on me. Don't listen to her. The estate sale was her idea from the start. She was the one who couldn't wait to get the house cleared out and sold so she could get her hands on the inheritance. She's been talking about redoing her kitchen for months. This has her greedy fingerprints all over it. I was just trying to be a responsible son. It was pathetic and deeply revealing. For their entire lives, they had operated as a unit, with Grayson as the self-appointed pragmatist and Brooke as the social director. Now under pressure, the facade was cracking, revealing the ugly selfishness underneath. They weren't a team. They were just two people who had found a common convenience in managing my decline. The true power shift, however, became apparent, not through their frantic squabbling, but through the calls that started coming in from the outside world, the world they had dismissed. Doris, my newfound gatekeeper and ally, would buzz my room with a tone of hushed excitement. Virginia, there's a Mr. Croft from New York for you on line 2. That was Julian, calling to give me daily updates. Then a few days later, Virginia, there's a woman on the line who says she's from Sotheby's auction house. Is that real? Yes, Doris. I'd say a thrill running through me. Put her through to Miss Albright's office, please. Then came Christie's. Then Phillips. The giants of the art world, the very institutions my children would have considered the pinnacle of culture, were now desperately trying to get in touch with the mother they had relegated to a beige room in sunny Meadows. They weren't calling for Grayson, the successful financial planner. They weren't calling for Brooke, with her perfect social standing. They were calling for me. The people who bought my art were also beginning to surface. Albright's office was fielding calls from bewildered, ecstatic, and sometimes terrified individuals who had stumbled upon the greatest bargains of their lives. A local dentist who bought one of my mid-sized canvases, Industrial Sunset, for $200 because he thought the colors would look nice in his waiting room. He was now the owner of a painting valued at over $800,000. A young couple who bought 3 of my charcoal sketches for $10 each to decorate their first apartment. They now owned a triptych worth more than their house. The story had taken on a life of its own. It was a fairy tale for the art world, the legend of the Sunny Meadows treasure. My children were no longer the heroes of their own story, the dutiful children caring for their aging mother. In the court of public opinion, a verdict was being rendered. They were, at best, clueless fools. At worst, they were villains who had tried to dispose of a national treasure. Alistair Davies, true to his word, had delivered a thick portfolio of documents to Miss Albright. It was a Rosetta Stone of the entire debacle, detailing every transaction. With that information, Julian and Miss Albright's team began the meticulous process of recovery. They sent out letters to every buyer, explaining the situation. They weren't threatening. They were strategic. The letters stated that while the pieces were technically stolen property, we were not interested in punishing innocent buyers. Instead, we offered them a deal: cooperate with the re-authentication process and formally register the piece with the Cora archives via Croft Gallery. In return, they would receive a new official certificate of provenance, turning their questionable bargain into a legitimate blue-chip investment. The response was overwhelming. Everyone agreed. My children were completely shut out of this process. They had no legal standing, no information, and no control. Their frantic calls tapered off, replaced by a sullen, angry silence. They had hit a wall of lawyers and gatekeepers, a wall I had built around myself. They had wanted to simplify their lives by simplifying mine. Instead, they had unleashed a level of complexity they were utterly unprepared to handle. The power hadn't just shifted, it had reversed polarity. They were now the ones on the outside, looking in completely at the mercy of the mother they thought they had tucked away for good. The quiet, frail woman in room 3B had become the calm, silent eye of a hurricane of her own making, and they were being tossed about in the winds. After 2 weeks of silence, my children requested a meeting. The request didn't come to me. Of course, it came in the form of a stiff formal email from a lawyer they had clearly scraped together to Helena Albright. They wanted to discuss the situation and find an amicable path forward. Albright's response was simple. A meeting would be granted. It would take place on my territory, in a conference room at Sunny Meadows. The day of the confrontation, I felt a strange sense of calm. I chose my outfit carefully, not a nursing home housecoat, but a simple, elegant black tunic and trousers that Anya had picked up for me. I wore a single piece of jewelry, a silver pin shaped like a splash of paint, a piece Robert had commissioned for me years ago. It was my armor. I walked into the conference room 5 minutes before the scheduled time. Miss Albright was already there, her leather briefcase open on the table, documents arranged in neat stacks. On a large television screen, mounted to the wall, Julian's face looked out from his New York gallery. He gave me a small, reassuring nod. Anya stood quietly by the door, having promised to run interference and keep any other staff from interrupting. Grayson and Brooke arrived precisely on time, accompanied by a young, nervous-looking lawyer who seemed barely older than Anya. My children looked haggard. Grayson's face was pale, and he'd lost his usual air of smug authority. Brooke's eyes were puffy, and her expensive clothes looked rumpled, as if she'd slept in them. They saw me, sitting at the head of the table, flanked by my high-powered attorney and a world-renowned gallerist on a screen, and their step faltered. This was not the scene they had expected. They had come to confront their frail mother. They had found a board meeting. They sat down opposite me. Their lawyer cleared his throat and began to speak, but Brooke cut him off. Her voice was trembling with a mixture of rage and self-pity. "Mother, how could you?" she began, her eyes filling with tears. "How could you do this to us? Putting us through this public humiliation, hiring these people. We were just trying to help you. We were worried about you." Grayson jumped in, his voice tight. "We did what we thought was best. The doctor said you were declining. The house was a mess. We were trying to protect you, to make sure you were cared for." I let them talk. I listened to their practiced narrative of concern, their litany of excuses. They spoke of my well-being, my safety, their love. It was a beautiful performance, one they had clearly rehearsed, not just for me, but for themselves. When they finally ran out of steam, the room fell silent. I looked at them, my two children, my whole life's other great project, and I felt not anger, but a profound and sorrowful clarity. "No," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a shard of glass. "No, you weren't." I leaned forward slightly. "Let me tell you what you did. You didn't see a person, you saw a problem to be managed. You didn't see a home, you saw an asset to be liquidated. You didn't see a life, you saw clutter." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "For 40 years, I said, my voice gaining strength, while I was raising you, loving you, and supporting you, I had another life. A secret life." You are looking at Cora. Their faces were blank. The name meant nothing to them. Julian's voice boomed from the television. "Perhaps I can add some context. Cora is one of the most significant abstract artists of her generation. Her works sell for hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars. The clutter you sold for $500 at a garage sale represented a body of work with an estimated market value, conservatively, of over $50 million. Brooke gasped. Grayson's jaw went slack. Their lawyer looked like he was going to be sick. "That painting you always called the big blue mess. Brooke," I continued, my voice even, "the one that hung in the dining room. Its proper title is Elegy for a Minor. It sold at a Christie's auction 6 months before your father died for $750,000. The money paid off your student loans, Grayson. It was the down payment on your first house, Brooke. The color drained from their faces. The truth, in all its brutal transactional glory, was finally dawning on them. Their entire lives had been subsidized by the very thing they disdained. You didn't help me, I said, my voice softening now, not with pity, but with finality. You erased me, or you tried to. You took my home, my work, my name, and you did it with a smile, telling yourselves it was for my own good. I stood up. This meeting is not a negotiation. It is an announcement of the new reality. You have no legal authority in my life. You have no claim on my assets, present or future. The fortune you inadvertently unearthed does not belong to you. You will not be inheriting it. Grayson found his voice, a strangled whisper. Mother, what are you going to do with it? With the money. I looked past them, at Anya, who was watching from the doorway, with tears in her eyes. I'm going to do what you should have done. I said, I'm going to invest in things of value. All recovered profits from the illegal sale of my work will be placed in a trust. That trust will have two purposes. First, it will provide a full scholarship, the Cora grant for promising, financially disadvantaged art students at the local community college, to be administered by my friend Anya, here, once she graduates. Anya's hand flew to her mouth, a sob escaping her. Second, I said, turning my gaze back to my shocked children, the trust will fund the construction and endowment of a new wing right here at Sunny Meadows. It will be called the Robert Miller Center for Creative Arts. It will have studios, galleries, and teachers, ensuring that the other residents here are never dismissed as frail or finished, but are given the tools to express the color and passion they still have inside them. I let that sink in. My revenge wasn't punitive, it was constructive. I was taking the value they couldn't see and using it to build a legacy of creativity and dignity, a legacy that would stand in stark contrast to their petty, thoughtless act of destruction. The charade is over, I said softly. You may go. They sat there for a moment, stunned into silence, the architects of their own irrelevance. Then their lawyer, realizing the battle was comprehensively lost, gestured for them to stand. They rose like automatons and walked out of the room without another word, their faces a mask of ruin. The door clicked shut behind them, and in the sudden, peaceful silence, I finally, truly felt free. My life now is nothing like the one my children had planned for me. I did not, as it turns out, wither away in that beige room. After the confrontation, I made a few changes. I still live at Sunny Meadows, the community I've found is a comfort when it's on your own terms. But I don't live in room 3B anymore. I had them combine 3 of the rooms at the end of the hall, knocking down walls, and most importantly, installing a massive floor-to-ceiling window that floods the space with natural light. It's my studio apartment. One section is for living, with my own comfortable paint-splattered furniture that Miss Albright's team managed to buy back from a very surprised college student. The other section is my studio. It smells gloriously of turpentine and linseed oil. I am working again. I am creating. I am Cora. The Robert Miller Center for Creative Arts is nearly complete. I can see the construction from my window. Every day, I watch as the steel beams go up, forming the skeleton of a place that will honor my husband's memory in the best way possible by fostering the very creativity he so lovingly protected in me. Anya, who is now the first recipient of the Cora grant and is finishing her final year of art school, is helping me design the curriculum. She comes by every Tuesday and Thursday, not as a nurse but as a friend, a colleague. We drink strong coffee and argue about color theory. In her, I see the future. I hear things about Grayson and Brooke, of course. Small towns talk, Julian's press conference, and the subsequent articles in major art journals had made them locally infamous. Grayson's financial planning business suffered. It turns out people are hesitant to trust their life savings to a man who couldn't recognize a $50 million fortune in his own mother's attic. Brooke's social life imploded. The story was just too juicy, and the schadenfreude, I imagine, was irresistible to her circle of friends. They tried to sell the old house, but the story had tainted it. It sat on the market for a year before they sold it at a massive loss. I don't feel joy when I hear these things. I feel nothing, a quiet finality. They are no longer a part of my world. Their consequences are their own. They are the authors of their own bleak, little story. It's funny, isn't it? They looked at my age and saw an ending. They saw a liability, a task to be managed. They saw an old woman and assumed the story was over, that all the important chapters had already been written. But they forgot to look at my hands. They forgot to look at my eyes. They never bothered to see the fire that was still burning there. What I've learned is that frailty is a perception, not a reality. Strength isn't about the firmness of your handshake or the speed at which you can climb a flight of stairs. It's about the resilience of your spirit. It's about knowing your own value, even when the people closest to you tell you you're worthless. They called it clutter. The world called it genius. They saw an ending. I was just getting started on the epilogue, and it is by far the most beautiful part of the book. So that's my story. It just goes to show you, you should never ever let anyone else tell you when your story is over. You are the only one who gets to write that final chapter. I'm curious, have you ever had an experience where someone completely underestimated you? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to read your stories. And if you found my story inspiring, please give this video a like and consider subscribing to the channel for more stories about people who refuse to be written off. Thank you for listening.